recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jacobs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists and Speaker Gingrich for being here today. This is a very critical issue for the future of our nation and our young people. I served for over 7 years on the Buffalo School Board, so kind of a lot of my tone here will be with that experience, but certainly it highlighted for me the significance of what you're talking about today. I can't recall the exact statistics, but I do remember our kindergartners and our pre-K kids coming in with a significant number of them already needing remedial help because of the fact that they had oral language deficiencies and the other basic building blocks that are required for them to be able to learn to read. And so this is a very important issue. Mr. Malik, I just wanted to ask one question. Your testimony about that the U.S. invests a smaller percentage of GDP in childcare and early education. Is that federal funding or in total funding?
Sorry, I believe that's from combined federal, state, and local funding.
Because I know we are different than many other places in terms of the majority of our education funding comes from state and local governments, or mostly local governments. And I go back to my Buffalo experience that I'm really disinclined to just look at expenditures as a barometer, because the Buffalo public school system spends an awful lot of money with not very impressive results. We spend right now probably about $30,000 per student, and that's the public governmental funding of it. That doesn't touch on any of the additional outside money in terms of nonprofit charitable work, which we have an incredible amount. I remember vividly when I first came on the Buffalo School Board, we had recruited a new superintendent who came from Ohio. After a couple of weeks, he briefed us on his impression of the school district, and he said, you really aren't running a school district, you're running a jobs program for adults that happens to educate every once in a while. So I think it's very, very important on how we spend the money and that we responsibly spend the money. And I just wanted to leave time for Speaker Gingrich, if you could comment a little bit more on what Congressman Good talked about. We talk about the indicators here, the difference that certain expenditures, certain programs have on outcomes. You talk a lot, Mr. Speaker, on incentivizing family formation, removing the disincentives to family formation. From your research, could you just talk a little bit about specifically the impact of not having a two-parent household, the impact of fatherlessness in communities, and if we could work towards strengthening our families and two-parent households, what your research and experience has shown that the difference that would have on outcomes and alleviating long-term cyclical poverty?
Thank you for the question. I must say, hearing from somebody in the Buffalo area automatically for me brings back memories of Jack Kemp, who was probably the greatest Republican advocate of rethinking how we help the poor and how we get people to be prosperous of anybody I ever served with. So I'm delighted to have that question. A couple of quick comments. One, if the government would simply measure outcomes rather than inputs, you'd have a much better sense of what's working and what's not working, and you'd have some really troubling problems, because there are whole programs that don't work. It's not a function of money. They just don't work. And there I would say I helped launch A Nation at Risk in 1983, which was the Reagan Report on Education, which said, if a foreign power did to our children what we're doing to them, we would consider it an act of war. And it hasn't improved. You look at the Baltimore school system. I can't speak to Buffalo, but I spent a lot of time looking at the Baltimore school system. It's tragic how much we spend and how little we get done, and how the children are the ones who suffer. So I think that's a key part of this. I would also say, if you look at Marvin Olasky's great book, The Tragedy of American Compassion, and Charles Murray's book, Losing Ground, you'll get the framework of everything you need to know. If you want to make sure somebody does not end up in poverty, have them complete high school, have them not get married until they're out of high school, and have them get a first job. They will almost guaranteed they will never be in poverty. Notice the changes in culture that occurs and the fact that we're now talking about personal responsibility and personal engagement. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton, for 5 minutes.